To all of our attendees, thanks so much for joining us. This is, we've saved the best for last. This is the end of a full week run here at Retail Innovation Week. We're thrilled to have Zahir from Mastercard join us. Zahir Khoja is the Executive Vice President of Global Merchant Solutions and Partnerships at Mastercard. Scott Latchett, who you see on the screen, is a partner here at PSFK. He's the President of Research and Strategy. And they're going to engage us all in a conversation around how consumer industry shifts are driving innovation in the payment space and help us understand how we can do more at checkout. With all of that said, I'm going to fade into the background, and Scott and Zahir, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining. Jeff, thanks for getting this all set up and ready to go. I know Jeff read off his cue cards here, but maybe you can give us a little bit more background in terms of your sort of current role at Mastercard and what your title actually sort of what your purview is at the organization.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. And thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak today. And hopefully the next time we do meet, it will be in person. But those are the days. So just to give a quick overview, I manage I'm responsible for bringing merchant solutions to our channel partners. And what does that mean? That means bringing things that are going to help our acquirers, payment facilitators, merchants of all sizes run their business and grow their business. So if you think about some of the challenges that they have today, what my team looks at is ways in which we can either build, partner, or acquire assets that will enable us to grow our merchant set across the world, enable us to offer solutions to merchants to help them run their business, to help them grow their business, and ultimately enable them to digitize all flows of their business, which in turn will help them to help us or help their channel partner to help them grow their businesses in ways that are new and untapped right now.
Amazing. And just sort of a point of clarity. So you guys are looking at this both from the standpoint of sort of physical sort of point of contact payment solutions as well as within the sort of digital realm as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way we look at it is, how can we bring stuff to both the merchant community as well as the consumers that enables them to have choice at checkout, but also build that relationship with the merchant throughout the journey of starting to checkout. So we're really looking at ways in which we can enable all of that through digitization. Digitization really doesn't disclude physical point of sale. It can be digital at the physical point of sale, but enabling the merchant to really have a deep relationship with their end consumer, ultimately helping them to run and grow their business.
Awesome. And we'll get into this in a little bit, but obviously it sounds like you guys are all thinking about this beyond just sort of that adding value to that sort of transactional moment and kind of looking more broadly at that relationship that the merchant has with that end consumer. And maybe we can kind of start off a little bit broad here and just look at who that consumer is, and maybe you can give a little perspective on some of those broad consumer shifts that you've been tracking and how that's informing the stuff that you're currently thinking about.
Yeah, I think if we look at the last few years where digitization has accelerated at quite a significant pace, the consumer is actually looking for experience. So you talked about the payment experience, but what the consumer is actually buying from a merchant is an experience, and that experience is delivered throughout the journey. So they're no longer thinking about, hey, how do I pay for this? They're thinking about, I want to book a vacation and I want it to be simple. I want the right vacation choices to show up, and I want it to be easy so I can enjoy that whole experience. Typically where we find transactions that get abandoned is when there's friction in that whole experience, right? And so consumers are starting to, or are accelerating the way in which they are looking for these types of experiences. And then the likes of Uber that started many years ago really kickstarted that for us. No longer do you put payment credentials every single time you take a ride. You have payment credentials in an application, and now it's your personalized driver, right? And so that trend is continuing. And I think we're going to see an acceleration of that as digitization starts to accelerate over the next 12 to 18 months as well. I also think that from a consumer perspective, while they're looking for aspirational things in their life and want to be able to indulge in these experiences, whether they be seamless experiences in how they purchase or experiences for organizations and want to put their money where organizations are doing good. And so consumers, we're starting to see a trend where consumers are willing to pay a little bit more, recognizing that a merchant that they're choosing to buy something from is actually going to reinvest that into the community or into the environment or into the world that they belong and what matters to them. And so they're doing good. So we're starting, two key trends, I would say. One is on the experience side, but the other side of it is really doing good. And, again, when we think about building or partnering or investing in solutions, we look at is what we're doing enabling that merchant to actually deliver a positive consumer experience and at the same time deliver good back to their community or the world at large.
Amazing. And that second point obviously is so important, sort of for the moment that we're currently living in right now, as all sorts of companies are not only struggling with their own sort of businesses and business models, but also how they're actually communicating to their consumer and sort of being a place of support within these complicated times, to say the least, I suppose.
Absolutely.
You mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but also sort of alongside that kind of consumer, especially as you think about, maybe, I don't know if it's different from a sort of small business versus, these giant enterprises, but some of these challenges that they're facing as the sort of digitization is, sort of accelerated in their own businesses. And I wonder if you can talk about some of those like challenges that you're finding.
Yeah, look, I think we're at a unique time right now, and merchants, consumers, traditional partners, I would say it's really a good time to unlearn everything. And why do I say that? Because what we did in the past was very incremental in terms of how we got to where we are today. In the world that we're currently in today, we're seeing a significant spike in digitization. And digitization, as I mentioned earlier to you, is not necessarily saying that you're buying everything online. You're buying stuff in store, but it enables you now as the consumer to have a relationship with the merchant. The merchant now has some information on who you are, what do you like, why do you like it, and how can they serve that up to you, right? Digitization doesn't have to be complex. So if we look at the simplicity of digitization, one key trend that we're seeing is the rise in contactless payments. And throughout the world, contactless payments are on the rise. If you look at just today in two markets, Canada and Australia, they've just raised the contactless limits. Why? Because consumers are the ones driving the demand to actually do these transactions safely and secure. But it's about the experience that we talked about earlier. They want a very quick, simple, safe, and secure way in which they can transact and move on. And again, that can be in store, that can be online, that can be in various different places. The second one that we're seeing really is a rise in choice at checkout, if I call it. Consumers are now being offered multiple ways in which they can check out. One of the ways that we've seen is the rise of buy now, pay later. There's been a lot of movement over the last 5 years, and a lot of players have come into this space, whether they be financial institutions or fintech lenders. But a lot of players have come into this space and really offered consumers the ability to have choice at checkout. And so I think as we start to think about where the world is shifting, or as I like to say, don't go to where the puck is, go to where the puck is going. If we think about where the puck is going, it is going towards digitization so that these merchants can have a longer lasting relationship and I would say a more intimate relationship with their consumer. but the simplicity of it should not be lost. And contactless is the simplicity where you can enable a good experience for your consumer at the checkout and enable that to enable that data to help you form the right relationship with the customer. And if you look at categories that merchants or consumers are speaking in volumes on, it's stuff like transit. They want to get in and out of transit as fast as possible. And so again, contactless provides them with that very unique but fast, safe, and secure experience in there.
And from a sort of, you touched on this idea of data, which is obviously super critical in, all aspects of business, but, is quite elusive for a number of different, companies, particularly with, at the sort of small scale. So I guess from a sort of practical point of view, what does that look like for a business? When they go to sort of this, these digitized sort of payments, what kinds of information are they getting? And then are you guys also helping them with kind of understanding then the sort of what they can do with that information as well?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Scott. And let me start by first saying that we're very committed to ethical data practices at Mastercard. And so we develop high standards in the security and how is it. We truly believe that the data is at the center of the consumer. So it's their data, and we want to make sure we treat it with the right levels of privacy and security that the consumer deserves. So I'll start by saying that. The second piece on this is, if you look at the amount of data that we have, which I think is where you're trying to get to, the opportunity to really analyze that data and make it actionable is where the rubber hits the road. It's really where the business, whether it's small or large, is really looking to take insightful and actionable insights into it. And so there's information or data that we can aggregate and share with businesses directly that say, hey, instead of opening, at 8 o'clock in the morning, our data suggests that it's better for you to open up at 10 o'clock and remain closed on a Thursday, and you will reduce cost, increase revenue. So that's business level that at an aggregate we can provide to these merchants. Then you take it to the next level, and it's data that we can aggregate and provide to our channel partners like financial institutions and banks, enabling them to make smart decisions around underwriting, around providing small businesses with loans, about providing consumers with loans. And so rather than creating a one-size-fits-all, how do we start to get the data to work for us at an aggregate level so that both the merchant and the financial institution have the ability to service the consumer in the right way, but in a way that's actionable and makes sense for them.
That's really interesting in terms of thinking about it, not just from the sort of consumer experience, but from that, and you mentioned this at the beginning, is helping your merchants grow their business. And so putting financial institutions in a position where they have a deeper understanding about who those businesses are and how to, literally help them grow through these sort of additional, influxes of cash, et cetera, and just sort of think about them in a much more holistic manner, I suppose. I guess alongside of that, I'm curious because one of the things that I've always been interested in is thinking about, in some ways that sort of transactional relationship where you as a consumer are choosing to make a purchase as this sort of handshake relationship that you have with a business, and how that kind of extends in terms of that, perhaps that loyalty opportunity, or how you see loyalty kind of being wedded to that, that sort of purchase experience.
So if you think about the experience at a merchant years back, the first engagement with a merchant started at the checkout, right? You got your bag of goods and you went to the checkout, you paid, and that's when the cashier or the checkout person engage with you for the first time. And through that, we've seen evolution of various different types of loyalty programs. What I would say is that if you're a merchant and the first time you're engaging with a consumer is at the checkout, whether it be online or offline, you're missing out on a lot of engagement. And so I think what consumers want as well is they don't want spray and pray. They don't want to know offers or about different things at merchants that are irrelevant to them. They want to know things that matter to them and matter to them most. And that's where personalization of information and providing offers becomes important. And so there's various different assets that we have within Mastercard that enable us to do that. Personal card linked offers that we can provide through our partners into the merchants and eventually into the consumer or the cardholder, that become relevant for them, that becomes something that they want to take advantage of, and it means something to them, right? We've got various different ways in which we can engage that journey and ensure that the minute a consumer decides to interact with you through the shopping experience, through the checkout experience, and then the return and the post, ways in which we can ensure that the offers remain relevant, even the locations, for example, at which a consumer will shop, the experience or the expectation that they have differs. And so through our test and learn, we're able to come back and provide information to a merchant that says, look, here's how you can provide offers in these locations with this type of experience, recognizing that it's not going to be the same across your entire chain. And so if I leave you with one thing around loyalty is, engage with the customer all the way through the journey and continuous engagement, but relevant engagement that matters to them. Because there's a lot of information in the digital world today where consumers are getting information and it may be relevant, but they're deleting it because there's so much coming at them. And so it's got to be engaging and it's got to be relevant for them to action it. And that's where we're going to see the real opportunity for merchants and consumers to have that better engagement together.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. Just having all that information doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be using it all the time, and you have to be very sort of targeted in the way that you're kind of bringing that to bear. I guess you
Right.
hinted at this a little bit as well, but this sort of buy now, pay later space, particularly as it sort of exists in the digital realm, but then also, I didn't realize this, but this is now being offered within the context of the sort of in-store experience as well. But what do you think is sort of, I feel like it's really kind of grown in the past, let's say 12 to 18 months, where you mentioned there's a number of kind of players in the space, and what do you see kind of driving that new shift in terms of this being a thing that the industry is adopting, as well as the sort of consumers literally buying into that?
I think it ultimately what's driving it is consumer, right? They're saying, I want choice at checkout. I want to pay how I want to pay, and I want to pay in a way that fits my lifestyle, fits my cash flow, fits my desires and my aspirations. If I want to buy that product, you don't tell me how I'm going to buy that product. I will be able to pick a product that makes sense for me. And so we've started to see that flourish over the last 18 months, as you suggested. The fintechs that are playing in this space right now have really helped to drive the category. They've helped to drive awareness around the category, drive usage around the category, and are very complementary to the work that we're doing as well. So last year in April, we acquired a company called Vise. And if you think about what Vise does, we provide lending, marketplace lending on one side, tied to a merchant on the other side. And merchants want to sell more. And so what Vise enables merchants to do is get a higher approval rate for financing for a consumer that is probably at a wide spectrum coming into their store or shopping online. And so when we looked at Vise, we said they've got a great tech stack. They've got the ability to increase approval rates, north of 80, 90% in some of these merchants. And they've also been proven in some significantly large merchants where they're seeing the adoption and they're seeing the increased basket sizes. They're seeing the consumers returning more and more into their stores because they have the opportunity to split payments into equal monthly payments. So I think, when we look at buy now, pay later, that space is growing. From our perspective, it's really looking at how do we provide consumers with the ability to have choice at checkout in a way that they can engage with that merchant, and in a way for the merchant to provide a positive experience. I talked about that in the beginning. It's about experience. For that merchant to provide a positive experience to their consumer by giving the highest approval rates in a marketplace lending concept, and then really working with the other players that are out there building the space, and leveraging them to be complementary in terms of driving what we're trying to do today.
And I guess alongside of that, and you hinted at this a little bit, is do the merchants themselves sort of recognize the opportunity that these types of services sort of bring to them, or is there still a level of kind of education that needs to happen within the sort of merchants themselves?
Yeah, Scott, I would have said 12 to 18 months ago, there was probably a lot of education at the merchant level to really understand it. I would say the way the industry and the category has developed over the last 12 to 18 months, merchants are, for the most part, aware of it. I think what they're looking at is trying to balance off the various different ways in which consumers can pay. You obviously don't want to clutter a checkout page or a checkout experience, because that, that provides a negative experience. Too much choice is negative. And so they're, now evaluating how can I enable a single platform or a single pipe that enables this choice for the consumer. So not necessarily providing all the choice upfront to the consumer, but providing them with the best that is available for them. And again, if I go back to why we acquired Vise, the technology enables us to connect into a merchant, and it allows that merchant to then produce or present, the right option for the consumer based off of the financing that's available at that merchant. So there's less for the consumer to really think about, but it's more exciting because they are going to get that high approval rate, and the technology enables them to do it. We look at it that when we talk to merchants around it, we say, we give you the ability to integrate once, and innovate forever.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And I guess, see, we talked about data. I mean, so I guess as you sort of look at, and you touched on contactless payments, do you see, I mean, you mentioned this within the US, and I'll sort of ask a two-part question, obviously. So mobile payments seem to be caught on much more quickly or more highly adopted in areas of the world like Asia and Africa. Do you see that sort of shifting now within sort of Europe and the US? And then sort of the follow on to that is, what's your sort of feeling in terms of, as we start to move into these new sort of emerging channels like in-car commerce and voice technology and things like that? What are your sort of feelings in terms of that as a sort of next opportunity?
Yeah, I'll take this as two different questions and answer them. So from a mobile payments perspective, listen, I think from my point of view, I would say each market is going to adapt to the technology at a very different pace. The consumer sets with those markets are very different, as you well know. And the adoption of the technology in the consumer's hand is different in all those markets. We're starting to see that mobile phones or smartphones are becoming a lot more ubiquitous, definitely in the developed markets, but also in the developing markets now, with them coming down, second generation, third generation being passed down. So the opportunity for those consumers to participate in mobile payments is there. The one thing I would say is when we're looking at promoting mobile payments to these end consumers, it's got to be simple, it's got to provide value, and it's got to be safe, secure, and convenient. And if the consumer believes all of those things, they're going to adopt to it really fast. So if I think back to 2005, really when mobile payments started on a Nokia 1200 bar phone, it was called mobile money, right? Where we were exchanging SMSs, saying I'll give you X amount of value if you give me this much in goods and services. That has now expedited into the digital world and into the smartphone world. And the variations of that are now starting to manifest across various different markets around the world. And so what we're doing from a Mastercard perspective is really helping the financial institutions and the partners, the fintechs in those markets, and the governments in those markets to bring this to market in a way that has value across the stakeholder value chain, whether it be the financial institution, the merchant, the consumer, the fintech, so that everybody starts to see value around it. And it's understood because it's bridging standards that are common across the globe. So it's understood that it's inherent with safety and security built into it. Now, if I go back to your other question, which is around payments built into in-vehicle commerce or voice commerce, look, I think it's not going to be about payments being built into these things, although they will be. I think payments is going to be there. It's going to be about, if I have the ability to buy something, leveraging my voice in my car or at home on a device, am I going to be able to buy it exactly what I want? Am I going to be able to get what I want, check out what I want, reducing the friction and not having to, not having to call back to that company and saying, no, that's not really what I meant to do. So do I think it's going to happen? Absolutely. I think how the experience evolves into all of these things is going to be critical, and payments are going to be frictionless. The consumer is going to be looking to drive that experience, and payments are going to be frictionless. And that's exactly what we're working on, is to enable that frictionless experience so that consumers can get what they want at the speed of what they want.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially with the voice component, how much that sort of user experience needs to get nailed down in order to, as you said, if you say battery, that can mean so many different things sort of across the board, and how, what you ultimately end up getting delivered. So I guess as we're sort of getting close to time, I'm just sort of curious, sort of looking forward, and thinking about, both what is exciting to you through Mastercard and just like what you're sort of working on currently. Where do you kind of see the big opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my crystal ball view on where I think this is all going to go. As I mentioned in the beginning, I think if we actually embrace the concept of unlearning everything, the speed at which things are going to evolve and the usefulness behind those things that evolve is going to be high, because it's going to be built with end user in mind. And so I really believe that, through digitization, we're going to start to see a lot of personalization. We're going to start to see a lot of things that matter to me. And a lot of the things from perhaps the past are going to be there to learn from, but not necessarily incrementally build on, because we all have a smartphone now, and digitization is moving very fast. Banks are very quickly moving into the digitization phase as well. I think we're going to see new competition, or different type of competition than what we've known before in the merchant world. And so if you look at some of the players that are out there today, it's almost like it was back in my grandparents' time, where you would go to the butcher to get meat, and you would go to the furniture store to buy furniture, and you would go to the cobbler to get your shoes fixed. You've now got players that are very specialized. The Dollar Shave Club, right, is just sending razors and shaving needs. And that's where you go to buy it. So as a merchant today, as I'm thinking through how do I move my business forward, how am I also thinking about the specialized retailers and merchants that I'm competing with in a digital economy where the overhead costs are very different than what I have, especially if I have a blend of bricks and mortar and online. And so I really think that, the digitization of how things move forward is going to be extremely key. And the one that cracks the experience is really going to be, is going to be the winner through all of this. Ultimately, it comes down to that thing, consumer experience. The second thing that I think is going to be very, very critical is solving for small businesses. Small businesses are the heart of, our economy globally, right? There's almost 50% of the global economy is small business today. And so as we can continue to build solutions that enable small businesses to run their business, to grow their business, we're going to start to see that come together quite a bit. And these small businesses are no longer looking at just serving their street corner. They're actually with online, they want to be able to serve global communities. They want to be able to ship those things. So as we look at, the next couple of years, defining experiences and solving for this small business, to me, are going to be extremely critical. And as we work towards that, I think we're going to see a very strong and positive response to the work that us, as well as others in the ecosystem, are playing to really drive those two things.
That's amazing. That's a really great sort of note to close out the conversation on. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. I thought there's a lot of really great nuggets in there, and yeah, that was wonderful. So thanks, Zahir.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
If you have time, there's one question that just came in here. It says, there's been a lot of research showing younger consumers are very interested in alternative financing. Do you think that offerings like installments have appeal for other demographics, particularly as we head into an uncertain financial future?
Yeah, I think, when we look at different types of financing options, while young consumers tend to be a lot more digitally savvy because, growing up with a smartphone is just all they know. I think at the same time, you've got consumers who are going to be looking at making purchases for necessary items, household items, or education or health or other things like that. And, given the current times that we're in, they may not have the ability to upfront pay for those things. And so are they going to be looking for different ways? Are they going to be looking for installment solutions? Absolutely. These are not necessarily bad FICO customers. These could be very good FICO customers that are just in a position right now where they need to spread their cash flow in a positive way so that they can, rebuild themselves through these times. So definitely, I think what we're going to see, over the next 6 to 12 months is an increased demand for installment-like solutions in the market across a wide spectrum of consumers, not just the young consumer or the millennial, but across the spectrum of consumers who are looking for ways to help bridge themselves through their needs that they have at this time.
Amazing. Great. Thanks for taking the time to answer that as well. Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Zahir.
No problem.